Hello and welcome back to the channel. Now today we're talking about the menopause. Now most of the conversation around menopause is quite obviously about hormones, HRT, yes or no, when to start it, what type of HRT. And look, all of that is enormously important. But there is this big, enormous piece that barely gets mentioned, which is that what you're eating is probably making your symptoms significantly worse. And I mean, specific foods are driving specific symptoms through very specific biological mechanisms. And once you understand what's actually happening in the body during menopause, the connection to your diet becomes pretty obvious. Because menopause isn't just a hormonal event, it is a metabolic event as well. Estrogen and progesterone aren't just reproductive hormones, they are quietly doing a huge amount of work in the background. They regulate how sensitive your cells are to insulin, they control where your body decides to store fat, they influence how hungry or full you feel after a meal, and they also support how well you sleep as well. Now, when those hormones drop, all of that just shifts simultaneously. And your diet, without you changing a single thing about it, can start driving symptoms you would never in a million years connect to food. Now, I'm very aware that menopause is an absolutely enormous topic, and I want to cover it in a lot more detail in future videos. We've got HRT, we've got the psychological side of things, we've got exercise. There is a lot to get through with this topic, but this video is specifically about diet and symptoms, because what I can tell you is that from my own clinical experience, from the women that I've spoken to and looked after over the years, is that diet is consistently one of the most impactful places to start and one of the most overlooked. So blood sugar is a really good place to start here. So here's what's going on. So with lower estrogen, your cells become less sensitive to insulin. That is a very well established effect. And what it means practically is that when you eat refined carbohydrates like bread or cereal or pastries or anything sugary, your blood glucose spikes higher than it would have done 5 or 10 years ago. Your body pumps out more insulin to deal with it. Your glucose level drops, sometimes quite sharply, and then when it drops, the body often reads that as a stress event. Cortisol then rises, adrenaline kicks in, and what that actually feels like in real life is an energy crash in the afternoon, or brain fog that descends out of nowhere, or irritability that you can't quite explain, and this almost irresistible craving for sugar or carbohydrates. And then you eat them, and then your glucose spikes again, and then drops again because of insulin, and the whole cycle repeats again and again. This is why so many women describe feeling exhausted in a way that they can't genuinely put their finger on, like a bit foggy or flat or running on empty, despite getting a reasonable amount of sleep. Because a huge part of what they're experiencing isn't just menopause, it is blood sugar instability that the body can no longer buffer the way it used to. Now, the research linking glycemic variability like this to fatigue and mood changes is pretty consistent. And in menopause, that variability gets amplified by the hormonal changes already happening. And there's another shift worth understanding as well, all about fat. And it's less about how much fat you actually carry and more about where the fat ends up. So before menopause, estrogen tends to direct your fat storage towards the hips and the thighs. That is subcutaneous fat sitting just under the skin, and it's relatively metabolically inert. It doesn't really do much. After estrogen declines, the body then starts preferentially storing fat around the internal organs instead. And that is what we call visceral fat. And it behaves completely differently to subcutaneous fat. Now, visceral fat, and I did a dedicated video on this a few weeks ago if you want to check that out. Visceral fat is metabolically active in quite a damaging way. It produces inflammatory molecules, it worsens insulin resistance, it carries cardiovascular risk, and a diet high in ultra-processed foods and refined carbohydrates and excess calories, all of that accelerates that accumulation significantly. So this isn't just a weight conversation, it's that the fat being deposited in this stage of life is the type that actively drives disease risk and worsens the hormonal environment. So women who don't adjust their diet during this transition could end up in this feedback loop where diet drives visceral fat drives inflammation, inflammation worsens your symptoms, and then symptoms make it harder to sleep and exercise and then make good food choices as well. And it goes round and round. So let's talk about inflammation in a bit more detail then. So chronic low-grade inflammation rises during menopause. It's partly hormonal, it's partly gut-related, and it's partly driven by poor sleep. And diet is one of the most powerful amplifiers of it. Now, a diet heavy in ultra-processed foods and low in fibre and high in sugar pushes your inflammatory markers up. And that shows up clinically as things like joint pain and persistent fatigue and mood instability. And the kind of cognitive changes like slow thinking or poor memory or word finding difficulties that women are often told are just part of menopause and there's not much to be done about it. But the evidence, and I'll put some links in the description below for you, the evidence going the other direction is really compelling. Anti-inflammatory dietary patterns, like the Mediterranean diet, for example, being the most studied one, these are associated with less intense symptoms, and there are plausible mechanisms for why. It's not magic, it's that you're reducing one of the key drivers of how bad those symptoms are. And all of that leads directly into this idea that your gut and your hormones are directly connected. So your gut microbiome plays a direct role in the metabolism of estrogen. There is a specific group of gut bacteria that actually produce an enzyme that helps to regulate how estrogen is processed and then sort of recirculated through the body. So when your microbiome is in poor shape, like low diversity or not enough fibre, not enough plant variety, that process is impaired. And what that means is that more of your estrogen gets excreted out of the body rather than recycled. Circulating levels then fall further than they would otherwise, and symptoms worsen as a result. So women eating a low fibre, low plant diet in menopause aren't just missing out on general gut health benefits, they are actively accelerating the hormonal decline that they're already experiencing through a completely separate mechanism. And so this group of gut bacteria isn't something that most people have heard of, but the research on it is growing really rapidly. And it's a genuinely important reason why your diet diversity specifically, so getting lots of colour, lots of fibre, lots of different plants and nuts and seeds, matters so much during this period. And in terms of your muscle mass, after the menopause, women lose muscle at an accelerated rate. Estrogen plays a really important role in your muscle protein synthesis. And when it drops, maintaining your muscle mass becomes significantly harder than it was before. And if you add a low protein diet on top of that, then you're compounding this big problem. Less muscle means a lower resting metabolic rate, and your body burns less energy at rest. So your weight often creeps up, even without eating more. It also means that your blood sugar regulation gets worse as well, because skeletal muscle, the muscle that you can see, is one of the primary tissues responsible for taking up glucose from the bloodstream after a meal. And it means that your strength and your balance and your physical function, they decline faster, which matters enormously for your long-term health and your independence, and also your mental health as well. And from what I can gather, after speaking with so many women over the years, this conversation around protein and menopause is almost non-existent, and most people aren't eating anywhere near enough of it, which is very quietly making almost every other aspect of the metabolic picture worse. And in terms of your sleep, we know that the menopause already disrupts your sleep. You get hot flushes, night sweats, hormonal fluctuations at night, but diet can either make that significantly worse or significantly better. And most people aren't aware of how direct that connection is. Eating carbohydrates late into the evening, just before you go to bed, causes your glucose to fluctuate overnight, which is never a good thing. Alcohol as well, which is what a lot of people reach for to sort of wind down, it suppresses your REM sleep. It fragments the second half of the night, and it's one of the most consistent triggers for hot flushes. Blood sugar instability that starts in the evening can cause cortisol to rise in the early hours of the morning, which is why so many women find themselves wide awake at 3 or 4 in the morning with no obvious reason. Then the next day, the poor sleep raises your ghrelin, which is the hunger hormone, and it lowers your leptin, which is the hormone that signals that you're full. So you're hungrier, you want more carbohydrates specifically. Insulin sensitivity then drops further, and the whole metabolic picture deteriorates. It is this big loop, and it's one that diet changes can really interrupt. Right, so let's get quite practical here. Then I'm trying to make this video as short as possible for you, as requested by so many people in the comments. So the foundation of all of this, the thing that changes more than anything else, is building your meals differently. So every meal needs a really meaningful protein source. So something giving you somewhere between 20 and 40 grams of protein. So that could be eggs or chicken or fish or Greek yogurt in the morning, or legumes, or tofu, or cottage cheese. The reason protein is so important is that protein stabilizes your blood sugar. It signals that you are full better than any other food, and it's the main nutritional input for your muscle maintenance. So a reasonable target in menopause is around 1.2 to 1.6 grams of protein per kilo of body weight per day, spread across your meals rather than loaded into one meal or in a big protein shake. Alongside that, you want to get a lot of fiber-rich plants, so obviously vegetables and beans and lentils, whole grains, aiming for somewhere around 25 to 35 grams of fiber per day, which most people aren't even close to be honest. And also healthy fats, so extra virgin olive oil, like a really good extra virgin olive oil, and I get mine from citizensofsoil.com. No affiliation there, just a really good website. But also nuts and seeds, oily fish as well, and all of these reduce the inflammatory load and support your cardiovascular health. And then on blood sugar specifically, breakfast is where a lot of people go wrong. So cereal and toast and jam or a pastry on the way to work, these cause a really big glucose spike early on in the day that sets the crash and crave cycle before you've even got going. So switching to a protein-based breakfast, so eggs in any form, it could be scrambled or poached or dippy eggs as well, which we always have, Greek yogurt as well with some oats or some nuts and seeds, ground flax seeds with a bit of honey and peanut butter as well. And actually spending the time to cook a breakfast rather than having something really quickly before you go to work, spending 20 minutes sitting down and having a meal in the morning, all of that changes the trajectory of your energy across the entire morning. And when you do eat carbohydrates, combining them really matters. So toast on its own is a very different metabolic event to toast with eggs and avocado, for example. Fruit on its own raises your blood sugar faster than eating fruit with yogurt or a handful of nuts. So just trying to think of different combinations like this. These combinations slow down the digestion of those foods. It blunts the glucose response. And the difference in how you feel, honestly, trust me, is really noticeable. If you don't do anything like this at the moment, then just try it for a week and see how you feel. Now, feel good as well, trying to aim for 20 to 30 different plant foods a week. It sounds like a lot, doesn't it? Until you realize that herbs and spices and nuts and seeds, all of these count alongside vegetables and fruit. It's honestly all about diversity and variety in different colors more than volume. The other thing that you can do is to add some fermented foods. So fermented yogurt or kefir, sauerkraut, kimchi, all of these support your gut microbiome, and there is tons and tons of evidence that it will help menopause symptoms. And it's worth doing these consistently rather than just occasionally. So trying to eat them most days if you can, rather than just once a week. And then finally, one of the best pieces of advice I can give you is to just have a short walk after your main meals, or preferably after everything you eat, even your snacks throughout the day. Even just 5 or 10 minutes, if you do it consistently all the time, reduces your post-meal glucose spikes. And if you sort of extend that over 10, 20, 30 years, it will have a massive impact on your long-term health. It sounds almost too simple, but the evidence behind it is absolutely solid, and it costs nothing. So what can you actually expect with all of these tips then? Well, none of this is a quick fix, and I want to be really upfront about that. These changes really do work, but they work gradually and through accumulation. What most people notice first is that their energy becomes a lot more stable. So the afternoon crashes become less severe, the 3 o'clock cravings start to ease a bit, and then your sleep will improve naturally as well. And then over weeks and months, your body composition might start to shift in a direction that feels a bit more manageable. So this is metabolic correction, working through the actual mechanisms that are driving the symptoms, not masking them. So let me just say that menopause is a genuine biological transition, and the body is adjusting to a new hormonal baseline that requires a bit of a different approach to food than you probably needed before. So the evidence is clear on what that approach looks like, and the earlier you make these changes, the more ground you can protect. So I really hope you found that video useful. Obviously, like I said at the start, this is a huge topic, and this is just a tiny bit of that topic that we've covered today. Let me know in the comments what else you'd like me to focus on in other videos, and I'll try my best to make those videos soon for you.